So this week, guys, we're making another easy recipe. We're doing stuffed cabbage rolls. I love this recipe. We have the super tender beef in there with the rice. We have the nice marinara sauce on top. Now, I do want to point something out. If you look right over here, we finally hit 100,000 followers. I want to thank each and every one of you guys. If you're not already liked and subscribed, make sure you guys like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's jump into cooking. All right, so stuffed cabbage rolls. Now, I know last week I said that the chicken pot pie was the first thing that my wife ever made for me, and I fell in love with it, right? Actually, she corrected me. This was the first recipe that she made for me. This is my version. I do a couple things a little bit different. So now it looks like it's a lot, but it's actually a very simple recipe. Now for the filling, you can either use Italian sausage. What I'm actually gonna use here, I have 2 pounds of 80/20 ground beef. We have about 1.5 cups of cooked rice. I like to use jasmine rice. Right here I have 2 heads of cabbage. Now, you probably need only 1 head of cabbage, or you might need like 1 and 1.5 maybe. Now, what I did with this cabbage is I brought a pot of water, an 8-quart pot to boil, and I dropped this in for about 7 to 8 minutes just so that the leaves are soft and I can peel them apart. If you don't parboil your cabbage, you're not gonna be able to roll up your cabbage rolls. In addition to that, I need 2 eggs for our filling. We're also gonna add some garlic powder and onion powder to this filling and possibly a little bit of parsley, we'll see. Now for the sauce, it's a very simple tomato sauce. Now sometimes I do add diced tomatoes, but I do find that they kind of make the sauce a little bit watery, so I'm gonna leave them out today. So we have 2 28-ounce cans of tomato sauce. We have a little bit of thyme, oregano, garlic and shallot, chili flake, a little bit of sugar for balance just in case I need it, and then fresh basil and parsley. You need a little bit of olive oil to get it going, and then obviously some salt and pepper. So like I said, very simple recipe. We're gonna start off by making the actual cabbage rolls first. So to start off our cabbage rolls, we gotta make the filling first. Now, like I said before, I have 2 pounds of 80/20 ground beef. Sometimes I like to use Italian sausage with the ground beef. Sometimes I just use sausage. Today we're just using the ground beef. Now to this, we're gonna go ahead and season with a little bit of onion powder. It's about 1 tablespoon worth. Tablespoon of garlic powder. If you're gonna use the fresh garlic and the fresh onion, you wanna saute it with a little bit of olive oil and then let it cool and then add it to this as well. We're gonna add some fresh parsley, just a little bit, about 2 to 3 tablespoons. Nice healthy pinch of salt, black pepper. We're gonna crack in our 2 eggs. And then lastly, I'm gonna add my 1.5 cups or about 1 cup of rice. We'll start with 1 cup first. This is just cooked white rice. I'm using jasmine, but you can also use long grain. The rice kind of replaces like breadcrumbs in a traditional meatball. It's gonna make these super tender. Now we're gonna go ahead and just give this a mix until everything's combined. And I'm just looking for a good ratio of rice to ground beef. The egg in this is also gonna help our filling stay together when it's in our cabbage rolls. Now this looks pretty good to me. An additional step that you could do here is you could take a little bit of your filling, throw it in a hot pan and just sear it off and taste it to make sure there's enough seasoning in it. This is probably the only time you're gonna have to actually taste this to make sure it's seasoned enough. So I do recommend just doing a little taste tester in a pan, have a taste. If it needs some more salt, just add it to it before you go ahead and roll your cabbage rolls. So now one thing about this cabbage is you wanna let it cool so you can handle it with your hands. That's why I recommend parboiling it, letting it cool down, and then rolling your cabbage rolls. Once you actually let it cool down, it's gonna be easier to peel off a layer of your cabbage, just like this. See, look at how easy that comes off. And then you're gonna use this to then roll into a cabbage roll. See that? So that will be a very good size little cabbage roll right there. So now you're gonna lay your leaf of cabbage right on the cutting board. We're gonna take some of our filling and we're gonna kind of shape it into like a little football shape. And we're gonna place it right in the center of that cabbage. Then all you're gonna do, just like so, you're just gonna go ahead and roll this up. Make sure you tuck in the sides. Just kind of roll it up so it's nice and snug. And right there is a perfectly little cabbage roll, and you're gonna do that with the rest of your cabbage, and then we're gonna set this aside and make our sauce. So let me do a couple more for you guys. Let me set this over here. Let's go ahead and peel off one of our cabbage leaves just like this. Lay it directly in the center of the cutting board. Shape about 2 ounces of your filling into a little football just like that. Then we're gonna place it in the center and just roll it up. Make sure you tuck in the sides. Just like that, perfect. Now, as you can see, these cabbage rolls are almost like translucent. That's how you know they're actually gonna cook and they're gonna be nice and tender when you go to eat this. Sometimes if the cabbage rolls are too thick, like kind of like the top layers of the cabbage, they're a little tough. So that's why I kind of like to use like the middle layers of the cabbage. I find it's a little more tender. So real quick, guys, while I was actually rolling these up, I wanted to mention something. When you start to get towards the core of your cabbage, this little membrane in here is gonna be pretty tough. So what you're actually gonna wanna do is take your knife and you're gonna wanna make a little triangle cut, just like this. Now you don't have to do it, it just kind of helps with the texture. And you kind of just pop out that little membrane. You're not gonna wanna eat this. It's never gonna really cook. It's gonna be fibrous. It's just not pleasant to eat. So then when you roll this up, you can kind of just tuck these like this, and you're gonna go ahead and roll up your cabbage roll. So as you can see, you're probably gonna get around 10 to 12 cabbage rolls. You have quite a bit of cabbage left over out of one, but as you get down to the core, it's gonna be harder and harder to actually roll this. So you're probably gonna have to throw this in the water again and boil it if you wanna reuse this head of cabbage, or if you're doing 2 heads of cabbage, then you're gonna use the leaves from the other head of cabbage. But 2 pounds of ground beef got you about 10 to 12 cabbage rolls. The original recipe I think I wrote called for 4 pounds of ground beef and sausage. This I'm kind of doing just a half recipe. Since these are all rolled up now, we're gonna work on making our sauce. So now for the sauce, this is really just a basic marinara. I like to add a few more herbs to it than normal. I have a large pot here on a medium heat. We're gonna add a few tablespoons of olive oil. Just kind of coat the bottom with the olive oil. Now we're gonna add in 1 small shallot. You could also use a sweet onion if you don't have a shallot. Always season the onion with a little bit of salt to help draw out some of the moisture. We're gonna season with a little bit of black pepper as well. Now the reason why I say to use a shallot or a sweet onion is because I do want a little bit of sweetness introduced to the sauce to offset the acidity of the tomato, but that was the reason for a little bit of sugar as well, so I'll adjust it just to make sure our sauce is well balanced. Now we're gonna add the minced garlic. This is about 4 to 5 cloves of minced garlic, a little bit of chili flake, dried oregano, and dried thyme. Now, if you don't have every single herb, you don't have to use them all. Like a traditional marinara just basically uses garlic, onion, basil, olive oil, and tomatoes. So I just like to add the extra little dried herbs, but you don't have to use them if you don't want to. Now, we're just gonna let that garlic fry for about 30 seconds or until you just begin to smell it. Then you gotta put something wet on it. You could use wine if you want. Today, we're gonna leave the wine out. We're gonna add in our tomato sauce, 2 28-ounce cans. And the thing is though, you wanna make sure that this sauce is thicker than you think. Like sometimes you'll rinse out the tomato sauce with a little bit of water. I'm not gonna do that. The reason being is the cabbage is gonna release some juices or some water into the sauce because we're actually gonna bake this in the oven as well. So don't go crazy if you think your sauce is a little too thick. You want it thicker than you think. So we're just gonna give our sauce a stir until that olive oil and the herbs and everything are evenly distributed throughout the tomato sauce. Now we're gonna bring this to a very gentle simmer first before we season it. So I'll be back with you in a couple of minutes. So now our sauce is just starting to simmer. It's been around 5 minutes. We're gonna add a bunch of some fresh basil right to the sauce. Like I say in every video, it's my favorite herb. Try not to get splashed here. Stir that sauce a little bit. I'm actually gonna turn down the heat to a medium-low. I'm gonna add a handful of some fresh parsley. And then it tastes pretty good. I tasted it while we were waiting to turn the cameras back on. I'm just gonna season it with just a little bit of salt. Doesn't need much. A little black pepper. And this might be surprising to you guys. I'm not gonna add any sugar. You know, the onions did what they were supposed to do. Maybe these tomatoes were harvested and they're very sweet tomatoes. I don't know, but the sauce tastes pretty sweet on its own. So that's why you always gotta taste your sauce. Sometimes you get tomatoes that are more acidic. Sometimes you get tomatoes that are sweet. These must be sweet tomatoes because I don't have to add any sugar. So now you don't have to let this sauce cook long. I mean, pretty much once it's hot, it's good to go because you're gonna bake this in the oven like I said. So now what we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you guys how to assemble the casserole with all the cabbage rolls and the sauce and everything like that, and then we'll bake it in the oven. So right here I have a 9x13 casserole dish. We're gonna add a little bit of our marinara to the bottom of the dish. Kind of spread that out, not too much. So once you have a nice thin layer of sauce like this on the bottom, we're gonna go ahead and start to layer in our cabbage rolls. Some are gonna go vertically, some will go horizontally. And the good thing about this recipe is I gave you enough to have some extra sauce at the end. I've made this before in the past where you kind of run out of sauce and you don't have any sauce at the end. I like to have some of the thick sauce at the end to spoon over my cabbage rolls before I enjoy them. Because like I said, the cabbage is gonna release a lot of water. So this is probably gonna be like a watery sauce by the time it comes out of the oven. We're gonna go ahead and cover this with aluminum foil. Make sure it's nice and tight. Kind of make sure you crimp the sides down. We don't want any of the steam to escape. So now we're gonna go into the oven that I already preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. This is probably gonna go for around an hour, and then we're gonna check to make sure the meat's cooked through and our cabbage is nice and tender. So now these were in the oven for exactly 1 hour. What you're gonna do, you're gonna take your probe thermometer and you're just gonna test for tenderness, and you also want the ground beef to be cooked to at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit internally. Now these are probably gonna be a little bit higher than that, around 175 or 180, because you gotta let the cabbage get soft. Another thing is I wanna point out is, look at all that fat that's in here, all that water. it really thinned out our sauce. So that's why I like to reserve some sauce that I just had simmering on the stove while this baked in the oven. So now we're gonna go ahead and serve this up. So now to serve this, you're probably gonna eat around 2 cabbage rolls each. You know, maybe somebody will eat 3 cabbage rolls if you're like me. If you have small children, you give them the smaller pieces, they'll probably just only eat 1. So we're gonna add 2 of our cabbage rolls right to the plate here. Add a nice amount of our sauce that we reserved that's been simmering away on the stove. See, it's nice and thick. Now this is optional, but I'm gonna hit it with a little bit of Parmesan cheese. Just as much as you like on top. Then we're gonna garnish with a little bit of parsley because I used all the basil. And there it is, guys, that's our stuffed cabbage rolls. Let's go ahead and give them a try. This is super rich. I'm just so surprised at how sweet these tomatoes are. So that brings me to my first point. You gotta make sure you understand the canned tomatoes that you're using. Some are a little bit sweeter than others, some are a little more tart. These ones happen to be sweet. I didn't have to add any sugar. If you're using a different brand tomato, you're gonna have to add a little bit of sugar to offset that acidity. The ground beef and rice, it's very tender. I recommend using the 80-20 ground beef. It has enough fat content in here to make these nice and super juicy. Just overall a great marinara sauce. Make sure you guys use a nice head of cabbage. Make sure you boil it in the water. Make sure it's nice and pliable so you can roll up your cabbage rolls. Super easy recipe, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you learned something, give me a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.